Okay, let's get started. So tonight I want to talk about composite UI components in Godot. Let's first start with definitions. Composite means we are creating UI components that compose other UI components. So we are gonna use default UI components and wrap them in our own UI components and maybe use them in more complex situations. So that way you create a chain of UI components. Uh, and at each step, if you could keep a component's working logic on its own, you will create flexible components so that it's not going to be dependent on a certain situation. It's usually difficult to come up with components like that because most of the time the need for creating composite UI components, um, it is a unique case. So you start writing your unique cases, but the more projects you use similar components, then you try to generalize those components. So it's a work in progress. It's sometimes not practical to plan a composite component uh, from scratch. However, there are some in the industry. One of them is video player. Uh, Normally, a video player has a display area and the control buttons underneath. So you have buttons as separate components, but altogether they are working in conjunction with the rest of the components. So altogether, this whole thing is usually labeled video player. So similarly, when you browse websites, you usually come across um, price points or sort of service choices. In this case, you have a standard price point, basic, professional, and ultra. So I'm going to create something like this tonight. So we can look at um, mini components like there's a button component here, maybe some kind of feature list, and maybe price display, and the title of the price, sorry, the title of the service or the package. So you could consider these four elements as separate components, but all together, this area, um, it's kind of hard to select, but this red area is a bigger component. So if it's possible, we could duplicate this component and change its data so that we are not manually creating all these bits. Maybe we can also pass data so that the creation is also dynamic too. So I'm gonna switch to Godot and do this from scratch. Let's see. So looking at our design, we could either start with the standard look. By that I mean the normal look or the highlighted look. Um, let's start with the normal look. So in this case, we seem to have um, a darker gray area, some lighter gray area. This might even be white. Let me check the value. It's white. So there's some kind of gray area that's covering the upper part of this product or service card. So we have basic dimension information here. So let's start by creating something that is roughly this size. So 236, 340. So for that, we will start by creating a user interface. So we could label our final component as maybe price selector or package selector. Or it could just be package. So inside, we seem to have two color areas. So we can use the color rectangle component of Godot. So this already provides a flat color area. So we know this area is going to be 90 pixels tall, and we could set the width manually, or if possible, we could actually ask this component to stretch as wide as possible. So for that, let's give the final size of a package here. Say it's let's round it up to 240, and the width and height will be 240 by 360. Let's see if we can actually make this as wide as the package. So sometimes some default components, they don't always have the same layout considerations. Depending on the situation, you might want to swap some of these components with other ones. But let's see if we can actually make this expand. In this case, it didn't work. Let's see. Here we could maybe pick top wide. So that worked. So this expand is actually not working in this case, but the height is actually 0. So we know that the height here will be 90. So when this expand doesn't work in the size flex, sometimes you have to adjust the layout. So in most components, this size flex will actually work, but color rect, in my experience, has been a little bit unique, but you still get around with the manual sizing and the layout option here. So underneath this color area, there is going to be another colored area. So we could actually consider it as this gray area. And let's look at the color. It's F5, F7, F9. I believe in my previous attempts to replicate this project, or basically create this project, I'm now replicating it. I already stored the color information, so it's here. So now we change the color of this rectangle to light gray. Let's duplicate this component, and let's move it down, and this one's color will be white. I don't actually know if there's much difference. It's close enough. Maybe once we put in next to each other, there will be some kind of variation. Although I want to double check whether this color is actually, it is F5. Yes. F5, F7, F9, yes. And this one, actually, yeah, this one doesn't look white. Okay, now we see the difference. So we actually want to stack these two components so that the darker area is always at the top and the white area is always at the bottom. If we stack these two color rectangles into a VBox container, then they will always be stacked up. So we don't have to manually adjust like this. And that when we actually want to move them, they can actually move all together. So let's put a VBox container here, and let's stick these two inside. Now this VBox container, this can actually take as much space as possible. But again, you still have the same size considerations here. In this case, we want to have this VBox container to occupy as much space as possible vertically and horizontally. So we actually go full rect. We don't see our color rectangles because their height has been reset. So let's actually set this to 90. For the bottom one, let's see if we can get away with this. So we did expand. This actually expanded, and it thinks it's starting here, whereas we know that, okay, the first color rectangle still has reset to 90. So to force its minimum size, we gotta put 90 here. So that way this information will never be zeroed in. So this is how you can always make sure that this occupies at least 90 pixels. Now we see some gap between these two color rectangles. That's because VBox container by default has a separation. So I believe that's 4 pixels. Because this box is not checked means that it's actually using the default value. If we check this, it's actually going to use 0 explicitly. So if we do this and the gap is closed, and first color rectangle is, we know it's 90 pixel tall, and this one is occupying the rest of the space, which means since the VBox container that holds those two color rectangles, the VBox height will actually define how tall the white part here will be, and that is defined by actually the package's height. So we have some flexible height adjustment here. I'm going to undo it. So this is pretty much the space we want to occupy for one package. Next, what we can work on is this label part. So VBox container is holding those two color pieces. So label should go in the package but outside the VBox container. So click package and let's hit label. It's automatically positioned to top left. Now we know there's some kind of spacing here. We can adjust that by calculating the gap here, but we know for sure that this label will occupy horizontally as much space as the package area itself. So we can actually cheat here and say this label should probably be positioned top and centered, and sorry, top wide, so as wide as possible, but snap to the top. So we come to the layout and we say top wide. You also see a preview here in the icon on the left. So here's top wide, and let's type some basic text here. So that's standard. Now the text is white. It's hard to read over a gray background. Let's discuss fonts here. So, but maybe before fonts, let's actually fix the color so that we can actually see it properly. So the color is A3ADB8. I believe I already have that color information right there. So it's already looking much more legible. So let's center the text. And once we change the height, we can come back and then change the v-align of this component. So let's actually do that too. Let's imagine it is as tall as this, and we do vertical center. So we now only have to change the font style. So let's close the custom colors, font style, dynamic font. Let's open our dynamic font information, which is missing font data, and here is where you actually load the font itself. So it's Open Sans bold 16 pixels. So we go settings, by default 16 pixels is here. Now this is looking as close to this as possible. We may have to alter the height of that label. That's fine. We can just adjust a bit. This way it's always vertically centered. Let's this is the package's title, or it could be name. Let's pick name. Now we have this round shape here, and inside price point. For a moment, you might think that, well, okay, this is very similar to the label, like we did the name for, and maybe create some kind of control node, and the control node will have maybe a background image, some kind of like color background, maybe a label, so that the label and the background color is like basically they are two things that form the price point. But I'll show you a technique that you could get away with just by using one label. If you hear the fireworks coming from the streets, sorry for that. Let's create our label here, and we know this is the price, and this is going to be some $1.30. Let's also change the color to the proper color. I believe it's the same color. Yep. We could have technically duplicated the standard label, which would have actually taken over some of the properties. Yep, this is the one. We know the font is different for this one. So let's pick a different font data. This one is Economica Bold. Yes, 32. So the settings is 32 right there. And let's say this is always top centered, and then maybe we pull it down. Something like that. Because we know that this number itself will be aligned, so this separation of two color rects that we put in the background will go right through in the middle here horizontally. So it's somewhat right. But what this price label is missing is that round shape in its background. So to do that without putting another object underneath and grouping them inside a control node is that we could change its style. So in the last presentation, we looked at some of these options, mostly style box texture to style our UI components. We did not use box flat, I believe, but now is the time to use box flat. So when we do this, by default, it puts a dark gray, somewhat dark gray background color. So let's change the color to red to see the effect. So now our gray text has a very sharp red tone behind it, and it's all rectangular. So here, when we look at the settings, this rectangle area could actually have corner radius. Now, we can pick some arbitrary value here, let's say 10 pixels top left and right. So now when I click out, you can actually see the effect. Now it is rounded, but how much rounded should we make it so that it actually looks like a circle? Well, when we click this object, we see that its width and height will be 70 pixels. One thing we can do is we can go to the rectangle section of this control and force this component to be minimum 70 pixels. Now when we do this, because we are actually resizing this component from its anchor point, your component will no longer be centered. So you either do the sizing first, alignment later, or during your alignment, maybe you could have picked the center point, kind of like dead center in the component, so it would actually grow out of its center point. Right now, the center point is, or the pivot point is its top left corner. So it's trying to grow out in the sort of lower right direction, like sort of diagonally to the bottom right corner of the screen. And to adjust it, that's actually here, pivot offset is, in this case, we would have to set this to 35 to 35. So again, different considerations. You sometimes have this information later, so you can't escape it. You may have to do some of this work a bit later. So right now, this text is not aligned because it's pretty similar to what we were adjusting in the title of our package. It's by default top left aligned. So we gotta change the text alignment to center and the vertical alignment to center. Now it's going to look centered. Let's keep changing our corner radius. We now know that because width and height is 70 pixels, to have a perfect circle, all the radius values should be half of the width and height values. So we fill in those values and we have a perfect circle as its background. Now all we have to do is to re-center and come here and then adjust the position again. We might be off 1 pixel or 2 here, so you can maybe make this 55, I believe. So it's a minor adjustment. But let's change this background color. It's too harsh and it's going to be different anyway. It's E3, E3, E7. So I believe that's this one. Correct. Okay, so I'm going to save my scene at this point. And let's call this package. Okay, so this is starting to look more and more like our reference image here. Let's move on to the features or the packages features, what this package is offering to the buyer. In this example, all the text is the same. We will not change it because it's more or less the same, like maybe numbers will be different. So let's just take this text and let's try to put another label and then see what happens. And I'm going to resize it so that it's covering this area. I'm going to put the text here. Let's change the color to, I believe this is one of those gray colors that we keep using all the time. Yep. So by default, auto wrap flag of label is not turned on. So when you paste your text, if the text is wider than the predefined width of this label component, it's going to stretch the width. So we gotta turn on auto wrap and then try to resize our component. So now everything fits in. And because we copied some text, it didn't actually keep its white space. So we got to adjust the white space here by pressing enter between end of lines and numbers. We could even do double enter, or we could adjust the line height. So we can actually take a look at that. I believe that's under constants of a label. And when we change the line spacing, we can actually increase the spacing between lines. Vertically, it could be center or top. It doesn't matter because we can always adjust where this label is starting vertically within the package. But one thing is for sure, the alignment is centered. Now, this is good enough, but it's missing something maybe rather important. In each line, the number part of this information is bold. Now, so far we have seen that we can assign custom fonts to label components, and those fonts, uh, basically the font style comes as separate files and packages. So basically, when a font has a bold option, there is the bold font file for that font family. And when you have the regular font, that's a separate file. So in these two cases, in these two labels, we assigned um, bold Economica and bold Open Sans. Here, um, you can see which font and which font style has been selected, because there are actually two types of fonts in this area. Fireworks doesn't pick font selection here, because when you go inside and in edit mode, if the cursor is on the project's text, it's going to show a regular uh, version of this font, and in the number part, it's going to show a bold version of this font family. So we cannot do this in Godot using the label component, because it's only going to take one font. You cannot combine uh, two fonts as it's um, yeah, basically you cannot use two fonts to display separate parts in a label. However, if we change our label component to rich text label, it's like label, but it's supposed to display rich text. And what is rich about our text is basically, um, I mean, it's as simple as just making one part of this text bold and the rest normal, but it's rich enough. Like, rich means that you can actually create different styles. You could even uh, create different colors within your text. So as soon as we switched to rich label or rich text label, it seemed to keep the text information. So we have the data. We don't see anything here. That might be because the text is white and it's sitting on a white area. When you switch between components, by that I mean, if you have an existing component and if you change the type, Godot will try to transfer as much information as possible from the old component to the new component. In this case, text has been transferred, but the color information has not been transferred. That's because when you roll over the property section, the property name of color for this component is different than the label component's color information. So when the properties match, the data will be transferred. This property name will be important in a few moments when I actually move on to making some of these components we are now designing as sort of standard components, like they are going to turn into composite components, and we are going to actually take advantage of property names. So the default color will be our usual gray tone. I'm looking for text alignment. I don't see any, because this is a rich text component. So the idea is that you are going to be styling. So most likely one of the styles you can assign to different parts of the text is that which portion of this text will be centered. So there is no like center everything. Basically, it's much more advanced, but some default options are taken away from you. However, one thing we are also missing is, well, let's look at the fonts. Remember I said we were going to assign multiple font data or font files or information to our label, and this is where we can do this. So for the normal font, let's start with a dynamic font. As soon as I do this, because font information, font data is missing, the text has gone blank. So this will actually be okay in a moment. Let's double click and see. This is the default Arial font. I don't think I have Arial in the project, so we'll actually go with Open Sans, and let's pick regular, so at least something different. We know for sure that the size is going to be 13 pixels, so I'm setting that here. So now everything is 13 pixels. Now maybe this is a little bit small, so let's make it 14, because maybe Arial 13 looks as big as 14 Open Sans regular. So this is okay. Now we also have to pick the bold version, because we know 5, 10, 10, and the last 5 is supposed to be bold, but because there's no bold font information, it falls back to normal font. So let's assign font data, Open Sans, it's the bold. So for the bold fonts, we use Open Sans bold. For the regular text, we use the regular version of Open Sans. Now, when I said we are using each font, basically we are using the right font for each font case as far as the display requirements go, you would expect these numbers to turn into bold. But we are missing one more thing. Our text here doesn't contain any information whether this number is bold or not. And that's because this is just plain text. And to enter any kind of styling information, you gotta cut out this text and put it in BB code here. And now we can actually start styling it using BB code tags or syntax. So to make it bold, we put the bold statement, which is letter B in brackets. To close it, it's like HTML. You put the B in brackets, but before B you have the slash, so it's like closing tag. Let's enable the BB code, and then we can actually see 5 rendered in bold. And now 5 is actually rendered using Open Sans bold, and projects is normal piece of text that is rendered using Open Sans regular. Now we gotta do the same thing for the other numbers. I'll just copy and paste the code part, and then take the required value from the rest of the text. Now every bit that we thought should be bold is now bold. Let's actually get rid of one extra character of space there. Now, as I was mentioning before, this component doesn't have an overall center thing. Instead, we are custom editing different parts of the text. So I'm going to click this area to make the text area bigger, so we can actually work with a bigger area. So to center things, we can take advantage of the center tag, and let's close the center tag this way. Now everything has been centered. Unlike the label component that chooses vertical alignment top, I believe rich text label chooses vertical line as center. So although we had to use center to horizontally center things, it is by default vertically centered. So maybe there's an option to align this to the top. I mean, it could be as simple as just shrinking your component size, but we actually wanted to have some spacing between lines anyway. So we could do that by adjusting the line separation, something like this. Let's go 4. Let's try to reduce the space. The scroll bar appears here because it thinks it actually needs more space. Now, you could ask yourself, like it says, if there's some extra space underneath and at the top, you're actually right. There is some space because when we wrote this text, to increase legibility, I pressed enter after I typed the center tag. I'm now going to press delete and remove that end of line. And that will actually snap my text to the top. So this is actually like label component that it's always top vertically aligned. But because we've been forcing the text to start sort of when one new line after it's centered. So keep in mind, like for legibility, maybe you want to edit your text like this, but when you are finished, maybe you want to leave it like this. Similarly, you get rid of this area, the last unnecessary end of line. So let's click OK. Now you can actually squeeze this area as much as possible. And of course, when you go too far, the scroll bars will appear. But I think you get the idea that you got to be careful in what you are putting. Because although this looks like HTML a bit, unlike HTML, the white space is taken into account. So when you put multiple white space between characters, it will actually be displayed. So be careful. So let's save. And then let's look at our reference image. So all we have left is the sign up button. Let's put a button. And let's first type some text. And maybe let's style it a bit and then we can position it. So for styling, this button style, the idea will be very similar to the way we styled our price label. Now buttons always come with their own background anyway, unlike labels, which don't have any background information. But to change that style, we still have to deal with the style box information. Now, unlike the label, where we use the flat box style, we are now going to change the texture itself because, I mean, mind you could actually use the flat here, and actually let's do that because although this looks like a texture, I mean, in technical terms, it's just a flat background color. So let's expand that, and we know that color will be maybe this or this. Let's actually check the color. It's our E331, so this one. Let's just arbitrarily move this here. So the text will be Arial black 12. I'm not going to worry about the font information, but maybe the color is more important. So besides custom styles, we have to take care of the font color. So this is the A3. And what else? We need to, I think it's missing something. I'm not sure where okay. Was expecting to see a bolder text there. It's as if the color is either too light or simply because it actually doesn't have a font piece. So let's create our dynamic font, one of the Open Sans fonts, semi-bold. I still think there's something wrong here with the, yeah, the text is simply not there. Actually it's there, but it's very hard to read. Okay, so the background color is E3 and the font color is E3. So one of these is wrong then. So this is E3, that's all good, and the font color is A3. Something is missing. Something is not quite right. Wonder why. Let's pick a color that is really harsh. So the color is not reflected at all. So that's actually the bizarre part here. Okay. That's the bizarre part. Because it should have been at least glaringly red. And when we want to make the background color glaringly blue, that actually shows up. So, okay. So the font is well, this font kind of look bold anyway, so I'll try to pick maybe the font file is corrupted. So let's pick bold. It's still white. Oh, okay. I think I've been changing the wrong color information. I've been changing the disabled font color. So it's gotta be careful in what you are actually changing here. Okay, since that's out of the way, now we can go back to changing the background color to the more neutral gray color. I'll zoom out to the normal dimensions. Now let's recap. So we have the correct color information for the text, for the background. The background is flat, that's good, but it's missing the corner radius. Let's make it 3 pixels round all around. So there's a nice rounded background, maybe 4 pixels, but I'm not going to bother with that. And this by itself actually looks okay to me. I'm going to bottom center this and maybe pull it up a bit, something like this. Save our work. Now I think this is looking quite good. Now font size is a bit off, I don't care, because we have more important things to look at. So one thing we can do at this point is we want to have 4 cards like that, or 4 packages, so that when each package is laid next to each other and the information is different for each package, we look at something like this. Let's at least try to line them up properly. So for that, we are going to need a new scene where our main node can be packages. Now, this is what we can do. We can import our package, and we can come to the root, import another package, and move this to the right. And well, we can actually do this 2 more times, but we are always going to look at the default text that we created, which is the standard package. Now Godot offers you a way to edit the children of these imported scenes, but then you're not really taking advantage of like inheritance, because you are sort of changing things, and would be much better if actually all this information was coming from some kind of like a data structure. Maybe, I mean, if you are using Godot to build desktop applications, maybe that data might be coming from a database, or some kind of cookie, or JSON file. So actually, before I started this project, I created a data script where I wrote the information we see in the design file. It's your package titles, your price points. I wrote AS as the features. That this is basically the rich text area. I'm not going to change that text since it's all the same in the design anyway. So this is some kind of placeholder, so you could actually type your own stuff and then fill in dynamically, which we'll see for title and price. And one last thing here, this highlighted case, which will be maybe the important part of tonight's presentation. When we make these components and they are composing other subcomponents, but then sometimes the package should be highlighted so that this by itself, although it is like a package, it actually has a state. In this state, this package is highlighted because maybe the user is actually doing something like, well, they mouse over each package, and between each like back and forth action, maybe this one is highlighted, and when they move to the left, the basic one is highlighted, but the professional one will be dehighlighted. Will go back to its original gray state. We'll look at how to do that without creating two components, and we are actually going to see how we are going to take our basic work here and turn these into what I call composite components, because just the button itself, although this is a component, it actually doesn't hold a state, because this button will soon have a highlighted state. But let's first lay them out without any highlighted, without any concern for highlighting things. Let's just have all gray things. So inside our packages, we have these two components. So I will now get rid of these two nodes. I will write a script to query my data and then dynamically create a package. In my experience, when I was test building this project, I used a built-in script, but I think it doesn't offer code completion when you access other nodes. So I'm gonna stick with the normal workflow. So I'm going to create a scripts package here, scripts folder, and going to save my packages script in there. It's default, otherwise no comments template. Now, one thing we want to do is for sure is to create packages. So this function will create a package in each I jumped ahead. Let me pause here a second. When I was talking about data, this data GD was made a singleton through autoload. So this data and whatever here is defined is available to each script file. So for argument's sake, I'm going to call this packages. Not sure why. Oh, I'm trying to save. Okay, it first asking me to save the scene because I actually haven't saved this scene. Okay, data actually has packages. That's cool. Because I'm still in packages scene. So let's go back to TD. I'm still here. Okay, click the script. So this selectors now has been labeled as packages. So for each package in data packages, this is where we want to create a package. Now, it's as if we had access to something like this. I'm typing uppercase P, package, because package is my actual scene. This lowercase package is a data object coming from data packages. So the difference is this little lowercase package is each item. So in each iteration, one of these lines will be part of the for. This uppercase package is actually seen, so I need a reference to that. So here what I can do is to hold a reference by preloading my package. So let's get some kind of help. So scenes package scene. So this is my package. So instead of manually injecting it into the packages, I'm actually temporarily holding a reference here, but I have not instantiated this object. It's just sitting there in the memory available to me. So I need to create an instance of it. So I'm creating an instance, but I'm not assigning it to anything yet. And maybe I should. This is where the naming conventions come into play. Let's say new package, because this is the new package I'm creating. So I have now created a package instance. Now this new package has all the information that this scene has. Now, by clicking, by accessing the name label inside this package through code, I'm going to be able to change the name. And then I'm going to have to do the same thing for price and same thing for label. Now, this means that I'm going to have as many lines as possible, or as many lines as I want to change inside package. Maybe a lot simpler way is to create some kind of functionality in the package itself through code that basically package manages its own display. So here with I know I'm in the middle of like writing my code here, but we are going to pause here. So I'm just going to comment here, because now I'm realizing that I have to re-architecture my package code or the package scene. It's as if I need something here that actually sets up my new package. So this setup has to be written inside the package scene. So I go to the package scene and I create a script attached to the root. Let's save this in the scripts folder. Package, everything is default. And here we are going to create a setup function. It is so that when some information is coming into the setup method, that the text will be something. Now, when we do this, sorry for the semicolon, too many programming languages. This is actually hard coding something as the name's text value. Now, when we call this, let's actually test this. New package will be set up, and for this to work, of course, after we create a new package, we actually have to add this to our scene. And here we are actually writing this code for packages GD, which is actually packages, which means that this add child will actually add the child into the root, which is packages. So we are adding a new package. I am now going to hit F6 to see. Nothing has happened, or did it? I'm going to click the remote to see if packages actually has any child. It doesn't. That's because although we have written the function, we actually have not triggered the function. So when packages is ready, it's going to trigger this function, which is going to create as many packages as there are in the data packages and add them to its root. Now, all 4 children have actually been added, and all of them have the same something as their title now. We don't see them next to each other, because packages is the default control type. We'd rather have this each box container. Now let's change this. We are not actually changing the code here. We are still adding the child to the root component, which is hbox. But because hbox is laying out its children horizontally, this should actually lay them out horizontally. Now, it is actually trying to do that. You can actually see why. Because remember, hbox and vbox, they have default separation values. I think it's 4 pixels. You can actually see that when it's laying out the new child, it's actually shifting it horizontally 4 pixels to the right. That's why you see this sort of motion blur effect. I believe this is happening because when we set this up, although we know it's going to occupy this much space, we did not actually tell the packages to occupy as much space. So let me just put it this way. If there is something instantiated here, which is the package itself, which is this root node, let's look at this size flag. So basically what this is doing is it's horizontally filling some space, but it's not expanding enough to fill as much space as there is possible in its parent container. So when you hit this, and then we are going to save. So we come to packages, F6. Now, in the available area, I'm going to actually overlap the rendered application view over our stage view right in the background, because they really fit perfectly right now. I know that my packages width is this wide, and when it's going to have 4 components, and each component size flag is now saying that horizontally expand, and here's our 4 pixel default separation. Now these things are laid out properly without actually having that motion blur thing, because before they were filling kind of like the minimum space possible, and when there was no size consideration, kind of doesn't matter how wide your hbox container is. So always be careful with those size flags. And because the size flag for vertical space in the package is, let's actually go and look, it's fill. Although it's not expand, it's trying to fill as much space as possible too. So this expand kind of works differently when fill is enabled, when one is off, when like both are on. You gotta experiment that, because sometimes you will have another component right under this hbox, which is actually going to push everything up. But in this case, maybe we don't want to fill everything. So when you do that, then this is the kind of problem you will have. So it's only occupying space that actually has the fixed height. Remember that we actually gave the color rectangle 90 pixel height value. So it's pretty much using that, but it's actually ignoring all the other height information. So let's turn it back on to fill. So we still have this problem, but to solve this, what we can do is, instead of having the hbox that tall, we can actually shrink it maybe to this area. Maybe I actually shrank it too much. Yeah, I did. I think that's really up to you, like because you already had some fixed height information here. I think we stuck with 360, so that might actually be 360 here. I'm going to zero this in. So yeah, and maybe in your design you'll actually have some part of like the rest of your design will go under this hbox area. So let's also look at the custom constant here, and then we set it to 1 pixel. Let's rerun it. So it gives you this sort of 1 pixel separation between these packages. I know the color between them is light gray. It's actually revealing the background color of our application. You could change that, so I'm not going to worry about that. I think um, by now you have seen enough uh, cases that you could actually have pixel perfect design. So let's fix the titles. That's maybe much more important. So when we created our setup method for the new package, which is here, this guy has no information. So instead, maybe this actually should be passed some kind of data. And instead of something as the default or the hard-coded text, maybe this should actually have some kind of name or title. So let's actually look at our data to be more consistent. So it's as if I'm going to actually pass title. You could either keep this title, which means that you are going to keep this title, or if you want this to be named because you picked name as your component name in package. If you keep things consistent, it's going to be easier for you to remember. So let's stick with title for now. So for the price information, that's going to be price because we know that's price. Features, we are ignoring it, which is the label, and I'm going to actually call it features here because it's always going to be the same. We don't care, and we don't care about assigning any value to it. So sign up button is going to be here. So basically, really, it's just these two things we are worried about. Now, when we go into packages where we instantiate the package, this is where we can actually pass the package data. Now remember, in each iteration in the for loop, package refers to one item in the array that's in the data packages. So now when we run this, we are going to have an error. That's because by default, this price and name, because they are label components, they are actually asking for string values. Because price is an integer, it's actually going to throw an error. So so we actually wrap this in str to convert it to string. I'm also going to change project settings so that every time I actually hit F5, I actually want to run the proper scene because I've been hitting F6. Okay, now F5. Okay, now it's safer. Whichever scene I'm in, it's always going to run this. Now, as you can see, the titles are reflected properly. Price information is good. It's missing the dollar sign. So you could basically do it this way, or you could do it string interpolation using the percentage sign D, and there are different methods to combine your string and integer information. Now this is actually looking pretty much like our original design with the proper information coming dynamically from our data file, where it's actually still hard-coded in the project, but it might be coming from an external resource. I think now is the time to go over the highlight section. Now, we basically have, let's look at our highlight case here. So when a package is highlighted, multiple things will happen. We will have our title to go white. We will have our price label also go white, but also that its style, the background flat style part will change color too. So there are actually two changes in this one component. Changing the color for this text may be simple enough, but we are now entering a much more complex area in the price information in its highlighted state. Similarly, the background color and the text color for the highlighted case of our sign up button is also two different changes. Now, let's pay attention to the background color here. Since we grouped those two color rectangle components inside a VBox, that's an individual change. It's as if like each component is going to change its own color, but that's still two changes for one VBox container. So we have multiple things going on here. And when the user switches back and forth between these packages, the highlighted state should actually roll back to its normal state. So how do we achieve that? I'm gonna take a sip of water, just a sec. So when we come to sign up, let's look at our style information here. I'm gonna close as much as possible. So we know we want to change the color. Now, if I change the color here to, I believe, white, then it's going to permanently change the color to white for its default state. And similarly, when I change the style, so it uses the red background. So it's as if I should be saving this style to the disk so I can swap one with the other during runtime. So I'm going to save my style information. I'm going to put it under themes. You could actually create individual folders here. It's your design system, basically. How you label things is up to you. I'm going to call this sign up just sign up. This is the sign up default style. Again, your naming convention is up to you. So this is that. The color information, you cannot really save the color information, but we are going to see how we can actually change that. Let's create a duplicate of this sign up resource. When you roll over, you're actually going to see that it's saved as a, I think I put it in the wrong place, I believe. So yes, that should have been under themes. I think I accidentally saved it under scenes. So that should be themes. Now I'm going to move this into sign up under themes. And now I'm hoping it'll actually fix it, the reference. Yes, it did. So it's actually coming from a proper folder. So when you double click this resource, you're also going to see its definition. This is as if you're actually looking at this information when you click the sign up and then you expanded the right section. Now, one thing we can do is to save as this part, because we want to now work on the highlighted version of this. So in the highlighted version, this background color will be, I think it is ED55, but never hurts to check. Yes. So it's in the highlighted case, it's like this. Oh, when I created a version of this, I didn't double click the highlighted, so I was still actually editing the original one. Sorry. So I gotta hit save for sign up, and after I create the duplicate, I didn't actually double click. I should. Now I'm actually looking at the highlighted. This is the one I should be changing the color for. Now save. So double click sign up. It's the gray. Highlighted, it's the red. So it's actually good. Now, doing any work in here is never going to change this button style. That's still reserved here. But one thing we can do is this. Right now, the highlighted resource has been assigned to the normal state of this button. What if we load the normal state? Then we are actually going to go back to the um, original state, excuse me. And it is this kind of logic that we are going to implement in our code, so that when the user highlights this package, we are going to load on the fly different style for the button. Okay, and we can do the same kind of change for the font color. That's not going to be loaded, but it's going to be changed dynamically in the code again. So it is going to be similar to setup in the sense that there is going to be a function that actually does this kind of stuff, so that when it's highlighted, it's going to swap things. Now, where I'm writing this highlight is in the package. So earlier I was talking about each component handling its own inner state. We are actually going to take a look at that. But at the basic level, what we are going to do here is this package script will tell sign up button name and the price component to highlight themselves. So there is going to be a highlight function written for name, price, and sign up, so that the package highlight will actually trigger those three components highlight. That way you can have granular control in each component, because it's often counterproductive to change the inner workings of a component from an upper component. So basically you say, you tell the child component, go highlight yourself, and then that component knows what to do, because maybe there's going to be some kind of low level change in the future. So the parent component doesn't need to know what the highlight rule will be for the child component, but that it's always going to say, now you're supposed to highlight. So for now, let's actually pass this part. So let's start with the sign up. So although sign up is a basic component, it doesn't have a state. So to have a state and have some kind of functionality, we could turn this into its own scene. Now, scenes are essentially objects that actually have components, UI things. Like it's a scene is a flexible term. I think the best analogy is for people who used to work with Flash. We had movie clip logic, so you could actually combine movie clips together. So, well, at the end of the day, everything is an object. So, what you do with those objects and how they interact with is sort of some notions are interchangeable. So, I am going to save this branch, which is just one leaf, as its own scene, and it's going to be sign up scene. Now, this is still looking like a button, but now the only difference is I have this icon here that when I click, it actually has its own scene. It's as if I created a new scene. I created a button component and I did all my work, except I didn't have to do all this work because I saved this component from my package. So I kind of repurposed this component and now it's become its own scene. Now I can actually assign a script to this. You could have assigned a script in the other tree as well, but this is like much more self-contained, that I know that this is just a component by itself. I can actually pass this around, because before it was kind of always attached as a single component to the package. Now I can actually move this sign up scene into other scenes and components. So the sign up scene actually has its own script right now. And this is where I was talking about how to write the highlight function. Now, what we can do here is when it's going to be highlighted, what we want this button to have is to have a different font color. So let's look at the font color. And this is where the property name will be important. So when it's highlighted, we want to access the custom colors font color property. Say we want to set custom colors, and this name actually has to be the exact same thing that you see here. And if you have hard time remembering this property name, you can always click the icon here, open this components help section, and in the theme properties you are going to see it's here, font color. I think I'm looking at the right place. Custom colors, font color. I think, yes, it is here. Kind of remembers a longer text. It's as if this whole thing was written somewhere. Maybe I was looking at something similar, but in a different part. So now the value for this font, when it's highlighted, will be white. But when it's not highlighted, it should actually have this color, which I'm copying this color right here. So when it's highlighted, it's this. When it's normal, it's this. So how do we differentiate between the two? Well, it's as if this thing actually could keep its own highlighted state or not, and then maybe switches. Alternatively, you could actually do something like this. Say you have some kind of toggle logic here, or state, so that when highlight is passed through, maybe there's an if case here which actually sets it to white, and when it's false, it's normal state. We could also achieve it this way too. We could create a variable so that it actually holds its highlighted state. Say it's by default false, which is that it's normal state, so it's going to use the gray background. That when it's changed, and this is the setter and getter in other programming languages, we say, well, each time highlighted value is changed, you are supposed to call highlight method. So instead of calling this method directly with true and false, we could also do it this way. Just change the highlighted property of this component, which is going to trigger this method with the proper value incoming. And now we can actually do our if case here. So I'm going to pick a different name here. Highlight. Toggle is usually the word that I choose. It's as if like, yeah, if toggle is true, meaning if you want to highlight it, then it's the case. And it's like this. So we did the groundwork, but we still haven't triggered the highlighted state of this sign up button. Let's go back to package. So let's see. Inside each package, one thing we can do now is we could detect whether the user is entering this whole area, and then that actually triggers the highlighted state of this button. Now, to achieve that, we can actually use signals. So here we have mouse entered for the control, which is for the package. So let's double click, and we are assigning this method name to the package script. So it's like on package, when there's a mouse enter action happening, what we want to do is to access sign up, and this sign up will have Now, both the method and the property is exposed. We could use either one, but I actually want to take advantage of the property so that it could actually trigger its own setter. Now, when we do this, it's going to trigger the highlight method in sign up through setter. So, which means we actually no longer need this. So, yeah, I'm going to comment this out. So, let's try this. I'm now going to do mouse enter on package, package, and I see nothing. This is one of the most common errors you will come across. Depending on which component you are using in your composite UI, some mouse events are blocked, meaning it's sort of registered, but it's never sort of sent, meaning because everything is pretty much nested. At some point, if the mouse event is not broadcast to the parent level, at some point it's going to be blocked. And in most cases, that happens because color rect is one of those UI components that I think by default they turned off the mouse events. So here you'll actually see the filter means that the mouse actions will be stopped. So everything that is going to happen mouse wise over this component, it will be stopped. But we want it to be passed through, so it's never blocked. So we change the mouse filter to pass. Let's try this again. And we actually see something. The highlight state, now for the two, I actually quickly rolled over those two packages. I'm now going to do it for the third one. You can actually see the buttons text has become white because it's actually triggering the highlight method. Now, it doesn't look that obvious because we haven't actually changed the highlight aspect of it for its background style. So we can do that by setting another property for this sign up. Let's come here and let's look at the styles. This is the style that we want to change from just sign up to sign up highlighted. And instead of manually doing it this way, we are going to do it by referring to its property name, which is custom styles / normal. So it's like this. So change its normal state to something like, well, the highlighted sign up thing, sort of sign up highlighted. I'm kind of writing a pseudocode thing here, and maybe this is then just going to be sign up. But keep in mind, when we did the color change, the expected value is an hexadecimal code. For the normal state, the expected value is a resource file. So we actually got to keep reference to those resource files. So I'm actually going to create them here, and then I'll actually store them so that they can actually be referenced. They are going to be under themes, the way we save them. So I'm actually preloading them into the scene. They are waiting. This is very similar to the way we reference the package inside packages, only to be instantiated later. So now both themes or both style definitions have been preloaded. And instead of assigning a string value, we have to assign the proper case to each, I think uppercase U, in each if-else case here. Now when we actually do the highlight and highlight the basic, highlight professional, highlight ultra, we actually see this swapping. Now, because we haven't written the off case in package, meaning, so let's come back to package and we should write the mouse exit case. So when it's mouse exit, we got to change the highlighted state back to false. So then the else block in the highlight function is triggered. So when we do this, and we there's a similar problem here over the text area. The text area is not letting the mouse action go through, even though I'm over the component. This BB code area is actually blocking it. But anywhere other than that area in this package component will trigger the highlight state. So now you can actually go between the highlight and the normal state when you roll over between different components here. Now, I'm not gonna go through all the phases. The work is very similar. You create a highlight case for the price part and a highlight case for label. That's actually very simple because you already saw it's pretty much like changing the font color, but it's about writing the proper highlight case so that the component is handling its own work. And one last feature that would be really nice is that, well, just when I'm going between components, I'm actually seeing the highlight case change back and forth. What if the user actually steered away from the component? So it would be nice to hold the state of last visited or interested component so that when there is a final mouse exit case, I still keep a basic package highlighted. You do that by keeping a reference in the packages itself. So it's like packages know which package has been highlighted last. So when there is a final mouse exit signal coming from either package, it actually knows, okay, I know you tried to do mouse exit, but you know what, stay highlighted. And then when the user initiates the regular order of mouse enter, it will actually reset and then fix everything. So I have a working version of this. I actually moved everything into backup, so I could actually create this whole work from scratch for tonight. Not sure if I actually shove things around, if it's actually going to keep the file references, so hopefully it will. And yeah, because I have actually changed the data file so that it's actually using selectors. In the old one, it's actually using selectors. Just have to change this to packages. And I'm hoping, yeah. So this is the version that I built for like before the presentation. So here you can actually see the BB code area not blocking the mouse actions, having the proper highlight case for each subcomponent. And when the user exits the whole area, the lastly visited component stays highlighted. There is actually another reason why you might create such logic is we never actually really got to that part, but I mean, it's an extension of this kind of last visited part. Is initially, if you remember, we actually asked one of these components to start highlighted. When we were initiating our packages, we were also passing that information to the setup. That setup could actually have initiated that package highlighted already. But it's, again, logic-wise, it's very similar to how you can also keep its last state too. So that's all I have for tonight. So I don't seem to have any questions coming. So if there are any, you could put in the chat area. Maybe I'll look at it later, or you could ask it in the meetup group.